Yeah, thanks. First of all, thanks for having us. As you just mentioned, and I'm not too sure, I'm just wondering, Jacek, you did this yesterday. How does it work with the slide deck?
Good question. Can we get a certain guidance from the organizers? But yesterday I just played the slides from my computer.
I hope you can hear me. The best way would be if one of you guys is basically sharing their Zoom screen, and then it would be transmitted here. And if you have finished presentation, then you stop the presentation, and then we would see you again personally.
Sure. Quickly double check. Let me give me a second, please. Or Jacek, what do you think? Could you try to share your screen, and I would just start, because given the limited amount of time we have here. Does that work for you? Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks very much. A very brief intro. As you just mentioned, Philip, Daniel Resas and Partners, SMP, heading the firm's digital asset and decentralized finance practice. But in addition, and that's part of the capacity I'm here in today, is I'm a senior fellow at Wharton, heading and hosting a couple of groups on the regulatory issues around crypto assets and DeFi. And in that capacity, currently I'm leading a project by Wharton and the World Economic Forum, where we are working on a policymaker toolkit for DeFi. And I'm more than happy, I couldn't be happier to be joined by Jacek today, who was part of the core contributor group. But Jacek, although I'm sure you need no introduction at all, but probably you would like to introduce yourself as well, right?
Yeah, very briefly, I am a lawyer working in the blockchain and especially DeFi space for quite a few years now, and for a long time being a global legal counsel for the Maker Foundation, an entity, one of the entities behind the MakerDAO project with DAI, the decentralized stablecoin, one of the major projects in the DeFi space globally.
Cool. So what are we going to do today? Or what are we going to talk about today? We would like to give you a very brief outline of the project and the collaboration itself. We would like to briefly highlight the challenges and objectives that come with DeFi from a regulatory perspective. We are more than happy to share you the first insights, or to give you an idea how the working groups are actually working on those matters, and then try to outline what the next steps could be. So Jacek, could you jump two slides ahead, so that the next one, that would be perfect. So what are we talking about? Again, I'm leading a project. This is a collaboration between the World Economic Forum on the one hand and the Wharton School on the other hand. We teamed up with an internal kickoff in February this year, and the basic idea behind it is to provide policymakers and regulators actually with tools to assess a phenomenon which is really hard to grasp from a traditional regulatory perspective. The group itself started working then in August 2020, when we had our first core contributor call. And the general objective is to have this policymaker toolkit ready in May next year, to be able to present it at the World Economic Forum annual meeting. You probably have heard that this is not going to take place in Davos in January, but in Lucerne in May next year. At least that's the plan. Would you mind to the next slide? Thank you so much. To give you an idea about the types of engagement, again, we have a dedicated group of core contributors comprising around about 22 absolute leading individuals, representatives, including representatives from DeFi projects, legal experts, other subject matter experts. We have former regulators with us. And also and in addition to that, one of the key work we are doing here is to organize roundtables with either industry representatives, which we had last month, or actual policymakers and regulators. Just yesterday, we had a wonderful workshop with regulators and policymakers, primarily from the US. And there will be in the near future another workshop with representatives from more traditional regulated financial institutions, hopefully bringing in the incumbents' perspective, because this is in an effort of, we hope to see DeFi cross the chasm at some point, and we are pretty sure even this is a trust is working, a trust minimized ecosystem. We will need those traditional incumbents have on board as well. The next two slides we can go very briefly. Those are just name dropping slides and should give you an idea of the institution being represented as part of those working groups. I think we can just skip those slides. Talking about high level representatives from DeFi projects. Jacek, it's probably you're in the best position to give us an outline where DeFi stands today. What are the key challenges you and being a global legal counsel at Maker, you're at the forefront of what we're talking today.
I think that the major question here is why are we doing this, and why DeFi is relevant enough to gather so many great people to consider this topic, and even more importantly, why is this relevant for the regulators? And this is actually something that I love about this initiative because it was not triggered by the recent boom in decentralized finance, which is something many of you may have heard of. And this is also why I love this conference, the Crypto Asset Conference, and the work of Philip Sumner, because we are talking about some phenomena and trends which are not just recent, which are not just hot, but which are more long-term. And this is how we are seeing, as the group that is working on this project, we are seeing the decentralized finance space, not just from the perspective of the past few months with a very great increase in the volume of assets being traded or invested in various DeFi projects, but rather from the perspective of the overall potential of the entire space. And this is, we are seeing this as one of the major trends for the entire blockchain industry, one of the key drivers regarding where this technology may go. And this is very relevant from the policymaking perspective, because even though those policymakers who are familiar with those major regulatory debates involving crypto assets, they may not be fully aware of the scope, significance, and challenges of the DeFi ecosystem, which is very fast growing. And it is really, really posing some challenges unknown before, especially in the traditional finance space. And this is crucially important to understand DeFi business models already now. Even after the recent boom, these are still very early days. So there is still time for the market, but more importantly for the policymakers to understand the emerging business models, various governance setups, and then underlying technology to conduct the risk assessment, which would be basis for any future policymaking initiatives. So in terms of the challenges that the DeFi is posing, this is mainly because this is just different than the traditional financial industry, primarily because traditional intermediaries in financial markets here are not present or are present in a different form, which makes it very difficult to find so-called regulatory access points. So very often they're just missing, especially using the traditional regulatory methodology. And this is also, it is also difficult to grasp protocols from a regulatory perspective. This is not just about like traditional legal entities providing various types of financial services or products. This is about various novel ways of financial transactions and how the finance may operate. I was kind of mentioning this yesterday when I was talking about the Fountain project, my own project, where we really see open and permissionless protocols as a game-changing factor for the entire financial industry. So the objective is to enable the policymakers to understand, categorize, and analyze DeFi phenomena, and also to propose them a toolkit which they may or may not use to develop appropriate responses. And one similar activity of the World Economic Forum that was conducted before is a CBDC toolkit that was also addressed to policymakers that may want to shape their understanding and develop regulatory tools in order to respond to CBDC phenomenon. And now the work itself, just to be clear, I'm just a very simple member of this working group. Daniel is leading this effort as one of the organizers and has shaped this organizational structure that, in my opinion, really makes sense. The entire project is divided into a few toolkit modules. I think that this assemble line that you can see on the slide represents the idea very well, because the process starts with identification of the problems and defining them, including defining DeFi itself. What do you mean by DeFi? Then understanding, making sure that all of the crucial aspects of DeFi, like governance mechanisms or economic incentives, are understood by the regulators. Then risk evaluation. This is a group where I'm personally involved, really looking at DeFi from various risks perspectives. And as the last step, policy considerations.
Exactly, and with regard to the policy consideration, one general remark, and I think this is crucial to understand the project itself, because we are talking and working with a variety of international policymakers and regulators, but what is really important is to bear in mind, we are not advocating, we are not proposing specific ways to regulate DeFi. It's the effort is more on providing a toolkit to enable policymakers and regulators to do that themselves. So as Jacek just mentioned, this has 4 modules. The first one is on identification. Jacek, we can easily jump to the next slide. I think this is the better one. Yes, thank you so much. So what are we talking about when we're talking about DeFi? So we literally spend hours with a broader group trying to discuss what we are actually talking about. So just to find out that we probably not looking for a definition in a traditional sense, but just trying to have instead a more modular description, because as you can imagine, this is far from trivial. We actually need to what we had to discuss is what makes certain products or protocols decentralized. What does decentralization actually means in the first place, especially in this context here? And again, we found for ourselves that finding a definition is probably not really possible. So we try to come up with a description that grasps most DeFi projects as they are now, or what they at least aspire to be, because when looking at certain or many projects, we see a lot of aspiration there, but still a lot of centralized elements, but I get to this in a second. So what we mean is, what we're talking about is it needs to provide financial services, and it meets at least following the following 3 criteria to a certain extent or degree. It should operate within a trust minimized ecosystem. It should be non-custodial design, which means there is no central operator with unilateral control over the assets themselves, and it should be designed in an open, programmable, and composable manner. So, and this is the most essential part. This is really important. The most essential part of the beauty of DeFi, but it's also providing an entirely new set of risks. We had a fantastic discussion with regulators yesterday around the challenges relating to the composability. You just need to bear in mind that DeFi, as we know it today, basically anyone can create financial instruments, derivatives, possibly interacting with an unlimited number of further tokenized instruments or assets, which is extremely interesting. So we see, in a way, we see structured finance reinvented in a very short amount of time. It's really interesting. Would you mind to jump to the next slide, Jacek? Thanks again. So this should give you an idea how we are working. It's we trying to sketch out, discuss. We have this underlying transaction system, then the three elements I just outlined, and then we see this enabling DeFi protocols and on top of DeFi business models, and this is something where we try to look at in the next section. The understanding section is, and we can probably skip to the next slide already. What we try to do here is, and this section actually lays the ground for a proper risk assessment. Jacek is talking in a second. We try to in a way to disassemble the projects out there in different buckets and categories. We're talking about the value propositions. What are the key core stakeholders? What are non-core stakeholders? What is the governance structure behind it? That was really interesting to have this discussion yesterday with the regulators. What are the economic incentive schemes and what are the specific risks involved here? And the next slide gives you an idea that we are not really, this is not an abstract exercise. So we have a group of 5 people now assessing and disassembling nearly 20 DeFi projects out there. And this is part of the key effort here, because otherwise we are not able to identify the specific risk associated with those kind of new financial instruments and business models. But Jacek, risk is your key matter here.
And this is the third module in the entire project to evaluate risks, really from 2 perspectives. The first one from the bottom, from the DeFi market participants, and also from the policymaking perspective. And those perspectives really complement each other. It's not about like competitive perspectives on the problem, but rather trying to identify all possible risks and ways of thinking about those risks. And those are on the slides. You can see risk categories that were developed thus far within this particular subgroup. Just to provide you with an example, very often with respect to DeFi, people say about money laundering, terrorist financing risk that may be high due to the pseudonymity and peer-to-peer character of transactions on the blockchain and within DeFi. Yet on the other side, those systems tend to be transparent. And provide, this quite high level of traceability of transactions, which, on the other hand, changes the risk profile as known from the traditional financial industry. The fourth group is the key one, and this is where also some policymakers are involved. And I think that this is one of the core strengths of this project, that policymakers actually have a very important voice in shaping the contents and conclusions of this project. On that side, as Daniel said before, it's not really the case. It's not really the goal to impose certain tools on the regulators or ways to think about DeFi, but rather to provide them with frameworks that they may use in their specific circumstances. And the project really starts with mapping policy landscapes, right? So identifying the regulatory objectives that are crucially important, especially with respect to DeFi. And also various, a kind of regulatory methodology, various regulatory approaches that may be applied to DeFi. This is all about identifying those challenges and also conducting gap analysis to see which of the risks identified before are captured, which are not, and how they may be captured in the future.
Cool. I think we then can jump to the last slide, basically on next steps or status quo next steps. So where we stand today is we had the first 2 roundtables. We will have another roundtable very soon with regulated financial institutions. The working groups are now really working on the first rough drafts of the policymaker toolkit itself. So we are hoping to have a more comprehensive or more elaborate draft until the end of this year, and the review phase will then begin at the beginning of next year.